Throne of Eldraine has some weird but interesting cards in it. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. I have stumbled across another very interesting card from the spoiler, and I want to talk about the situation surrounding it. It's a weird, kind of deceptive card, I feel like. Now, before we go into that, I just want to touch quickly on another thing. Let everybody know that if you want to keep up to date with all my live streams, all my videos, you're going to want to make sure you hop in my Discord, and hitting the subscribe button's not a bad idea too, but you can always wait till the end of the video for that and decide if it's worth your time or not. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a particular land card from Throne of Eldraine. Throne of Eldraine has a different set of rare lands than most sets have. If you're new to the game, you can look at something as recent as Core 2020. You know how they have the two-colored temples that have scry? Well, most of the time, and I mean a heavy, high percentage amount of the time, Magic the Gathering sets have rare dual lands in them. This is actually one of the ways that Wizards make sure they make a bunch of money. They make sure that the lands that you need are put at the rare slot in most cases. You'll notice that uncommon lands tend to be lesser, or common lands as well, tend to be lesser versions of these dual lands. But Throne of Eldraine has departed completely from that and brought in these crazy new lands. Now, I may talk about other ones in other videos. These lands actually each represent the 5 different kingdoms of man. And the reason I have to put man around it is because they're not all 100% ruled by men. In fact, the kingdom we're going to talk about today isn't ruled by a man, but it is ruled by someone who operates as part of the realm of mankind. Because in Eldraine, it's essentially man versus wild. You have the realms of mankind, which has carved out a part of the world where it's just encroached by wilds on all sides. The wilds are trying to reclaim it. There's this ever-shifting balance between the two. But either way, the humans have carved things out. They have 5 different castles based on 5 different ideals. Things like loyalty, for example, or in the case of the castle we are going to talk about today, we're going to be talking about the location of strength and my favorite color, green. So with no further ado, let me put this land I'm talking about on the screen for you here so we can talk about Castle Garenbrig, because this is an interesting castle to me. Honestly, the artwork on this is gorgeous. We'll get into that. We'll get into it. The artwork's beautiful. But anyways, Castle Garenbrig is the castle of strength. Now, I did just mention that it's man versus wild, but in this case, it's actually like a giant who rules over the Castle Garenbrig. His name is Yorvo, and it's interesting because he's a giant noble, which makes perfect sense for a king. He's Yorvo, Lord of Garenbrig. Now, when an English version of this card comes out, I will most likely talk about it somewhere. But just to let you know, he's a 3 green casting cost creature that comes into play with 4 +1/+1 counters on him. And whenever another green creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on him. And if the creature is bigger than Yorvo, Yorvo actually gets another +1/+1 counter. So I like the idea that he just grows in strength. As the number of his subjects swell, so does his strength. He is a giant that lords over everyone else. And considering that there's a Wrath of God that destroys all non-giants, it's cool that he's a giant, so he won't get wrathed away. But anyways, Yorvo is the king of Castle Garenbrig. Now, Garenbrig is an interesting place because it's heavily aligned with nature. And in the story, in the Throne of Eldraine story, now I'm not going to get into genuine spoilers because me and AetherHub are actually doing a collaboration video on this, and that collaboration video, the first part, should actually come out tomorrow on his channel. So make sure you swing on by and check that out. I'll post somewhere that it's come out so you guys can go and check it out. But either way, what happens at Castle Garenbrig is they actually have access to a portal that can teleport you to different places in the wilds based on a number of different aspects. And Yorvo can use his behemoth strength to move the parts of the portal because it's a multi-piece sort of device. Again, I'm trying to be somewhat vague here because I don't want to really give too much away in terms of story spoilers, but suffice it to say, Yorvo is a unique ruler who has access to things that other rulers don't necessarily have. Some of the other castles have their own things, like the Cauldron of Eternity that was lost by Locthwain is another one, for example. But anyways, returning to Castle Garenbrig and the weirdness of this card. Now, the first line in the text box says, Castle Garenbrig enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest. So we've seen this ability already on certain dual lands where they say, hey, I'm going to come into play tapped unless you happen to already have out one of the two colors. So if it's a red-black land, it'll say, if you have a mountain or forest out, it comes out untapped. Those sort of lands that we're all familiar with because they've been reprinted a ton of times. This isn't something they normally do on these monocolored lands. Normally, Castle Garenbrig would be a card that just straight out said, this comes into play tapped, right? So you would look at it and go, all right, well, that's a step up. That is a nice step up, and I like that they're doing that. We can see that they use this mechanic in varying ways. You have the black, like, Witch's Hut land that only comes into play untapped if you already have 3 swamps out. This one just cares that you have a forest. So if this is the first land that you lay, if it's the first green land that you've laid, essentially, it's going to come into play tapped. Otherwise, if you have a forest, you get to use it right away. And it taps for a green mana. So this feels like an easy fit into any green deck, because as long as it's not your first land, which in most cases you're not going to keep a 1-land hand, right? So in a mono green deck, you're going to play this as your second land or whatever, and it's actually not going to make any difference to you. Aside from cards that care about forests, and with Blanchwood Armor actually leaving standard, there are fewer and fewer cards that care about you actually having forests out. It's going to be very easy to auto-include this into one of your decks. Now, where it gets weird is its final ability. Actually, another aspect of weirdness, now that I'm touching on it, is that this isn't a legendary land. It is kind of confusing that you could have out 4 copies of Castle Garenbrig when there is only one Castle Garenbrig in existence. So that part feels weird to me to start with. But it's really the final ability on the card that is the weirdest to me. It's 2 green, 2 colorless, tap it, add 6 green mana. Now just the fact that it says add 6 green instead of having 6 green mana symbols is different. Technically, it does save a tiny bit of space because but only one character. It only saves one character of space, because if you look at it, the word 6 is 3 letters, right? And then the space beside 6 and the space between 6 and the green mana symbol would also be gone. So that's 5 green mana symbols, right? That's 5 green mana symbols in the same amount of space, so they're saving one character, but the text on this doesn't go all the way to completely use the whole text box. So it makes me wonder why they've specifically made this template change when it doesn't really make a difference. I guess overall it does save them a tiny little bit of ink. I mean, they don't have to print, oh yeah, you know what, now that I think about it, they don't have to print 6 green mana symbols, and the green mana symbols are bigger than the letters in the word 6, and they also require green ink instead of black ink, and I'm guessing black ink is cheaper than colored ink. So I suppose there is some sort of like corporate underneath saving money aspect of it. Now, the ability, let me just start the ability from the beginning because I've yammered on enough about the 6 mana part. So it's 2 green, 2 colorless, tap it, add 6 green, spend this mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. Now, personally, I love this because I love casting big creatures. I love having mana to activate their abilities. Now, your brain at first may go, wow, 4 mana for 6 mana. That's a good deal. I'm ahead 2 mana. But you're not. You're only ahead 1 mana with this because you have to tap 4 mana and Castle Garenbrig, and Garenbrig can tap for a mana. So really, you're trading 5 mana for 6, which is accelerating by 1 mana. Now you may go, 1 mana, not that big a deal. But considering how blazingly fast decks can be, that 1 mana can make a huge, huge difference. Plus, it's all solid green. So if you were to go back in time and play with crazy stuff like Primal Crux or something like that, you're going to find that being able to get all that green would be way more useful. There's a lot of green creatures coming out now that have like 3 green in their casting cost bare minimum. So this is a nice way to be able to filter into more green mana. But it's weird because at first it makes you think, hey, I'm gonna get 2 bonus mana, I'm only getting 1 bonus mana, and then your brain goes, well, that's not actually that great. And then when you think about it and you go, actually, that 1 mana can be enough to edge you forwards and give you the advantage you need to full on win the game, right? So to me, this is actually a fairly potent card. Yes, there are the restrictions that you can only use it to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. I personally like that, and I think it's important to put that kind of restriction on there so that people aren't using it to put out crazy artifacts or, hey, look, I can use this to put out my Ugin, or I can use this to put out like a Karn, some crazy nonsense like that. So having it restricted that way seems like a smart move. Now, I said we would talk about the artwork, and we will now. It is absolutely gorgeous. I love this nature-aligned kingdom. This location, actually, you may have noticed in some of the flavor text on some of the cards from this set that they talk about beyond the Great Henge. Well, that's what we're seeing here. This is essentially Castle Garenbrig and the Great Henge, unless there's a greater henge that I'm not seeing. For those of you who aren't really 100% sure what a henge is, the easiest way to think of it is think of Stonehenge. You know, that crazy little stone setup they have out there in the UK region of the world, where it's just this circle of massive stones that people have wondered, like, how is this even made? How is it possible? It's the kind of stuff that makes silly people start going, aliens, aliens. And it's like, no, man, the ingenuity of mankind is what did this. But anyways, henges are essentially locations that have like big stone monuments, to put it in a very simplistic way. Obviously, to people who really know about henges, there's more details than that. But overall, just think about it as a place that has big, crazy standing stones. And you can see them here. And this is the artwork. We're using the extended